Welcome to our performance primer. I hope everyone is doing okay on this very sunny morning in Guelph, at least. We have a full agenda today. You will hear from our Director of Compliance and Industry Performance, Ryan McAfee, and right after you will hear from our Director of Information and Technology, Brandon Denton. I'm Valentina Kova. I'm the communications manager here at Ontario One Call. Just welcoming you and letting you know a few housekeeping rules. We will record this webinar and we will post it on our website in the next few days. So everyone will be welcome to review it, or for whoever cannot make it today, it will be available. We will send a follow-up email to all registrants later on to let them know that the video has been posted and the link. Right after the two presentation, we will open a Q&A session, but you're very welcome to type in your questions at any time today using the Q&A button that it's at the top of your window. And without further ado, I will leave the floor to Ryan.
Thanks very much, Valentina. I appreciate that. Welcome to our very first Industry Performance Primer. Everyone, our very first webinar on this topic. As Valentina said, I'm Ryan McAfee, Ontario One Call's Director of Compliance and Industry Performance. Now, we're calling today a primer to share our baseline performance data with you mainly from three perspectives. The first perspective is from that of a member or an underground infrastructure owner. The other perspective is excavators, as well as the full year or perhaps the regulator's perspective. That might be the best way to say it. Now, in terms of sequencing and timing, I'm planning to host these webinars approximately quarterly, a few months after Ontario One Call's board meetings. So that's sort of the pacing of these webinars, and more to come, of course. Now, each webinar will cover a different compliance topic, sometimes with a guest speaker. And today our guest speaker, as Valentina mentioned, is Brandon Denton, our Director of Information Technology. He'll be sharing some important information about compliance data and the function of our web portal. Next time, the plan is to talk about Ontario One Call's dispute resolution framework, which is available on our website, but I'm sure there are some questions about it already. So we'll devote half of our next webinar to the dispute resolution framework. And as Valentina mentioned, the performance primer and future webinars will be posted online. So if you miss a future webinar, you'll always have access to it on our website. And also, I wanted to send a thanks to Soleil Howe, who is one of our compliance administrators, who is going to be handling questions in the background. This is possibly the most important job for today, so thank you, Soleil. We'll be hearing from you, I'm sure, soon. So let's get right into it. So I thought that I'd start off, since this is our very first webinar, in describing the compliance and industry performance team sort of structurally and at a glance. So the first green box is my role. And then below that, you see the supervisor of compliance and industry performance. Now that role is held by Corey Officer. Corey's held a number of positions within Ontario One Call, so a lot of the people on this call may have had interactions with Corey already. We also have 3 compliance administrators and 2 compliance investigators. Now, the compliance administrators, like Soleil, who's on the call today, think of them as our early intervention team. Yes, they provide some administrative support. They do provide a great deal of analytical support to our team, but they also are able to solve, through early interventions, a lot of the complaints that come into the compliance team. I'd say the lion's share of the complaints that come in. So it's a very important role for us. And issues that are escalated internally are typically escalated from compliance administrators to compliance investigators who do the investigating. So unresolved matters are escalated to compliance investigators, as well as our sort of higher order and more public safety oriented contraventions of our legislation. So think things like digging without locates, digging in an unsafe manner. Issues like that would go directly to a compliance investigator. And of course, we've entered the spring season, so we have 2 wonderful interns who are helping us out, extended bandwidth and support for our analytics functions, as well as for our complaints handling, because it is a busy time of year for the sector, which means it's a busy time of year for Ontario One Call as well. Now, let's get into the performance data, because I think that's really the nuts and bolts of the conversation today, and the reason that many of you have joined the webinar today. So at a high level, in February, hosting the Administrative Penalty webinar, I shared Ontario One Call's 4 goals for this year. So just as a review, those are reducing late locates, reducing digging without locates, reducing ticket dumping, and of course, improving locate performance connected to priority projects. So priority transit infrastructure and broadband projects. Think of this slide here as your executive summary, and you'll likely see a slide like this in every performance webinar that I host with Ontario One Call. So let's begin with our first goal, and that's reducing late locates. So as you can see here, we've noted in Q1 of this year, so January to March, 80% or over 500,000 locates were completed on time. And in this variable, we've measured a 14% improvement compared to the same period of last year. The member view differs from the excavator view, and you'll see what I mean in the next slide, but credit where it's due that this improvement is noteworthy, and it demonstrates some commitment and a great deal of improved performance from members. Our next goal is reducing digging without locates. So these data come to us from 2 data sources. Both of these sources are lagging indicators. The first one being the ORCGA's 2022 DIRT report, and the second data set from Ontario One Call's 2022 awareness survey, so lagging. What I'd like to highlight for this point is that, or for this goal rather, is that there were 4,769 reported damages in 2022, which according to DIRT Report's data and analysis amounted to a 4.7% increase compared to 2021. And through our awareness survey conducted by Ontario One Call, 69% of survey respondents who dug without locates did so because they thought they knew where their utilities were located, or they thought their dig was too shallow to require locates. Now, of course, people on this call would know that neither of those reasons are acceptable for digging without locates, but it is noteworthy to understand sort of the prevailing thoughts and perceptions of the people within our regulated community and in Ontario writ large, that these are some of the things on their minds influencing whether or not they should get locates. The next goal is reducing digging without locates. The next goal is ticket dumping. Now, I know we have a few people who have joined the webinar today who may not be from our sector. So just to review that ticket dumping is the act of making a locate request without the intention of digging within 30 days. Now, what you see that we presented here is that 1.86% or over 21,000 locate requests were canceled in Q1 before the work to begin date. Now, this variable is actually improved by 41% compared to the same period last year. But let me emphasize that this is a proxy. We know that this isn't a perfect measure for this goal, but it is the best data that we have available today. So what do I mean by that? Well, as a proxy, we know that there are some challenges because there are some reasons that tickets are canceled prior to the work to begin date that are perfectly legitimate. For instance, clients may change the scope, weather conditions may change may push timelines down the road, and a number of other circumstances might cause locates to need to be canceled. So not a perfect data set, but it is our best available data for today. And with that, let me say that if you have any suggestions on a better proxy, or perhaps a different way for Ontario One Call to approach measuring this goal, or really any other goal that we're measuring on this slide, we'd really like to hear from you. Type your comments in the chat section, and Soleil will record your advice. Part of the purpose of today's webinar is to engage meaningfully with the community. So if you have some advice for us, we'd really like to hear it. And yes, as you can expect, we're also working on better measurements behind the scenes as well. Now, priority projects, you'll see here that we've listed that 18.2% or over 86,900 tickets submitted from January to February were handled through the new dedicated locator model. So there's an asterisk on this slide. So presently, only broadband projects are required to flow through the DL model. You'll notice that there's no comparison with this data to the previous year. That's because the current statutory dedicated locator model didn't exist in Q1 of last year. There was a legacy data model, or a legacy model, of course. Now, for today, I'll emphasize the importance and the value of the sharp increase that we've seen in the adoption of DL in Q1 that outpaced and sometimes more than doubled participation when compared to last year's spring season data. So the uptick in the participation in dedicated locator model is noteworthy for us here at Ontario One Call. So let's dig a little bit deeper into industry locate performance data. So the member perspective are the underground infrastructure owner perspective. So the visualization on the left. This measures the time it takes each individual locate notification to be completed by the infrastructure owner. It doesn't measure the completion timeline of an entire locate package. So you'll see here that 80% of the notifications that were received by infrastructure owners in Q1 were compliant, meaning that they were completed within 5 days. An additional 8% were completed between 6 and 10 days. Additional 4% were completed between 11 and 15 days. Additional 8% were completed over 15 days or not completed at all during Q1. So yes, overall that these data represent a 14% improvement compared to Q1 of last year. But the inverse is also true. These data also tell us that over 120,000 locates were late or not completed at all in Q1. And this is probably the most critical area of improvement that we need to address as a sector. Late locates aren't just a frustration, but they're often the root cause impacting our other goals, including our highest risk public safety contravention, which is digging without locates. So I want to bring your attention now to the visualization, to the pie on the right. So this is the excavator perspective. I've very often heard that the excavator's perspective is the more important or more critical perspective because this is how Ontarians writ large experience our legislation. The excavator perspective measures the completion time it takes for the entire locate package to be completed. It's the time when an excavator can actually begin their dig. So we can see here that in Q1, only 55% of the time were locate packages completed on time, so within 5 days. An additional 20% were completed between 6 and 10 days. An additional 7% were completed between 11 and 15 days. And 18% were completed over 15 days or not completed at all in Q1. So despite Q1 being a slow time for our sector as things ramp up for the busy spring and summer season, 14%, 45% of the time, projects, large and small, are being affected by poor performance. And in our sector, time is money. There's some optimism in these data, yes, but I think it's fair to say that there's also a ways to go for us. Let me pull up the next visualization, or the next slide rather. So these are the 2022 proportionality. Now, I know that although the focus of today is Q1, I did want to present a full year's data to this group. And of course, 2022 is the most recent full year's data that we have. So what you see here is underground infrastructure owners' performance throughout 2022. These are the top 25 of the poorest performers last year. So whereas the last slide gave us the members' perspective and the excavator's view, this is the regulator's view of the full year. The denominator here is the total number of late locate requests in 2022. So not the number of locate requests that infrastructure owners received, but the total number throughout the year. So this gives us sort of the impact view of performance from members. So let's dig down into this a little bit more deeply. So bucket one, so the dotted line box on the left. So these 10 members were responsible for over 61% of late locates in 2022. That was nearly 500,000 locates. Now, each of these underground infrastructure owners contributed between 2 and 18% of the poor performance to this data set. So let's look at box 2, or the solid line box on the right. Now, these 15 members were responsible for over 13% of late or incomplete locates in 2022. It's a much smaller number, about 109,000 locates. Each of these underground infrastructure owners contributed approximately 1% of the poor performance to the data set. So cumulatively, these 25 members were responsible for 75%, or over 607,000 late locates or incomplete locates in 2022. We didn't pick the number 25 by accident. There seemed to be a really natural break in the data set that was unexpected. And these 25 underground infrastructure owners did amount to 75% of poor performance last year. Let's take a look at the non-compliance per sector. I was interested to see whether or not there was a difference between the regulated sectors within the community that might give us some insight into sort of the narrative that our data are telling us. So within the top 25, there are 7 telecoms represented, and these 7 telecoms cumulatively contributed to 28% of the performance in this data set. Electricity utilities, of which there were 7 as well, contributed 19% to this data set. Gas utility, just one gas utility, contributed 15% to this data set. And the remaining 10 underground infrastructure owners are municipalities, and they contributed 13% to this data set. Not shown are the 746 underground infrastructure owners who individually contributed a fraction of a percent, but who cumulatively contributed 25% of the late locate performance in 2022. So that's a lot of information. That's a lot of numbers. We've taken existing data and we've looked at it from a few different perspectives. So really the natural question that you might be asking yourselves is, well, what now? So these data are helpful for planning purposes and to help us better understand the challenges of our work ahead. For instance, the compliance and industry performance team should reject a one-size-fits-all approach to compliance when it comes to requirements for locate performance requirements. It does give us some insight. I would say that we're very much right now in understanding the data, so we're not predicting right now. At this stage in the compliance team, we are in exploratory mode and not explanatory mode, if that makes sense. So we're still understanding the problem. We do have one intervention though that I'd like to talk about today, and that's the compliance support program. Now, so this initiative, compliance support, or CSP, which which is a pilot which will be launched later this year. The purpose of this pilot project is to support severely non-compliant underground infrastructure owners as they achieve compliance. So essentially, when launched, what this means as compliance support staff, so those are Ontario One Call staff from our member services teams and our compliance teams, will be engaging a cross-section of entities to submit plans to achieve full compliance with timelines within the Act for locate performance, locate timelines. In future webinars, I'll share our progress and what findings we've made through the pilot. Now, we're optimistic that CSP will be a good tool, but we know that we've got a lot to learn along the way. And once the pilot's done, then we'll have a better understanding of how compliance support or a program like it can benefit the performance of, can benefit and support underground infrastructure owners throughout Ontario. So that wraps up my first portion of speaking notes. Just a reminder, we're going to hold off questions to the end, but for our next set of slides, for our second presentation, I'd like to hand over the mic to Brandon Denton, our Director of Information Technology.
Morning, everybody. So I wanted to welcome everybody. Specifically, the next few slides, it's going to seem fairly simple. What we wanted to do as an organization was to ensure that we enabled our members' ability to access data with respect to the compliance. So one of the things that Ontario One Call has done has been to make an enhancement to our web portal. And within that enhancement, it provides people the ability to see for each notification, specifically members, the status from a compliance perspective, as well as the age. You're likely receiving monthly reports on your performance, and this data gives you direct access so you can see real time how you're making improvements. I want to also note that there are future developments to include a dashboard and a summary report of your performance, much like you receive now manually, but automated through our web portal. So the first step is figuring out how to get access to that data. So on the next slide, first thing we're going to want to do is get to Ontario One Call's website, ontarioonecall.ca. At any point in time to be able to get to our portal, you can always use the green button just above the gentleman's head there and click on Request to Locate. Once you've clicked on Request to Locate, you'll be sent over to our web portal landing page where it's going to ask you to identify who you are as a user. In this case, as an underground infrastructure owner, you're going to click on Member. You're going to log in with your web portal account. If you don't have one, you can register for one at this page by clicking New User. In order to gain access to the reporting data for the station codes that you're responsible for, you would need to engage our Member Services Department to ensure that you have all the appropriate access. Once logged in, you're going to want to click on our, let the slide catch up. Next slide. There we go. You're going to click on the request search bar. Once you're in the request search bar, naturally, the first instinct with this is that you're going to be able to search for one request at a time, but you can also toggle the advanced search button, which is on the next slide. And once you've done that, it will open up some additional options. So next. From there, one field that will always be required when you're on the advanced search is the receive date or a time frame. Our web portal does allow underground infrastructure owners to search for a maximum of 365 days at a time, though depending on the volume of data that you're going to receive, and that should be fairly obvious to you because you're out there completing the locates, I would recommend to likely only pull 30 days at a time. We are working to enhance the performance of the export and the search feature, but it's likely beneficial to only focus on 30 days at a time. Much beyond that, it's just historical information. You also have the ability to search by station code. So if you want to look at specific geographic regions that are either banded together in a single or multiple station codes, you can do so. You don't have to provide a station code or even a master code. But if you have multiple master codes that group separate geographic areas or station codes, you can certainly use those to do quicker searches. On this page, I also want to highlight that there are other features within the search tool. For more information on those, you can visit the website and look at some of our help videos. Once you've searched for that data set, so a set date range, you'll get our quick or tabular data results. In order to really look at the raw data, what you're going to want to do is click on Expand List. Once you've expanded that list, it's going to give you everything. It almost looks like an Excel sheet. At that point, you are going to be able to export that data. One limitation I do want to note is that the search result pane will only show the first 5,000 records. So even if you get 100,000 records, you can export them and the 100,000 records will export, but you will only ever see the first 5,000 results in the web portal on the search pane. If you need to do some analytics or you're trying to manage the data, we would ask that you provide more specific search criteria to narrow the result set. Once you've exported that that data set along with each of the notifications, and it will take a couple minutes. Little blue spinning arrow will show there as long as it's working. Within that Excel file, you will have all of the information that you see on the screen, as well as the two newest columns that we've added here, which are compliance age, which is the age bracket of the 0 to 5, the 6 to 10, etc., as well as the compliance status. The compliance status could be one of three, which is compliant, meaning that you've replied within the regulated time frame and used a status that is compliant with the Act. Non-compliant, meaning that you have either responded with a non-compliant status or outside the regulated 5 business days. And the third option is non-compliant, no response. And that's where we have received no 365-degree feedback from the underground infrastructure owner. We sent the notification out and have not received an update. All three of those statuses are searchable. So if you wanted to look specifically for non-compliant statuses, you can certainly do so. You can also look for tickets that still show as notification sent, which are tickets that from our perspective are unresolved. So I believe that's the end of this slide. And what I can do is pass this back over to Ryan. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, contact information will be at the end of this presentation.
And I'll just unmute myself. Thanks very much for that, Brendan. We actually get a lot of questions in the compliance and industry performance team that are perhaps best answered by Brendan's team, and we're always able to make those connections. So thanks for that. Now, given the time of year, we had a request to also talk a little bit about complaints handling, and then after this section, we'll go into the Q&A function for the webinar. So when it comes to complaints handling, I'll just advance the slide here. We receive a number of different types of complaints through the industry performance team. Digging without locate, late locates being the lion's share of the complaints that we receive in our team, late emergency locates, false renegotiated dates, deficient clearances, locate abuse and ticket dumping, emergency abuse, and inaccurate locates. Let's though focus on late locates for the sake of today's presentation. So the first thing we do in the industry performance team, and through mainly through the compliance administrator function, but also with some additional support through investigators and this summer through the search capacity that we built with our interns, is that when the CAPE team receives a complaint, we'll always we receive it in writing, and we'll always verify the complaint before proceeding with it. Meaning that if you're an underground infrastructure owner, you're not going to receive a complaint from us for a locate that was not filed or was not sent to you. So we will verify that complaint. If the complaint is verified, then the compliance and industry performance team will notify the non-compliant parties and instruct them to take action to resolve the issue. Next is that if the locate is still not complete, we will proceed by, or rather the complainant may contact us for further escalation, and that feeds into the compliance and industry performance team non-compliant programming. So either a compliance administrator or an investigator may elect to take further action on a complaint. So our process is timely. We do understand that remembering that Ontario One Call does not perform locates, that we're not always in the best position to answer questions about timeliness of locates and why they haven't been completed for ones that are late, which is why we require underground infrastructure owners to make those responses to complainants. So that is the end of the slide deck, but we've left plenty of time for questions from the group. So I will stop presenting this slide. Let's see if I can manage to do that. Let's see. And I will ask Soleil if they can share some of the questions that were posed prior to today's webinar. Now, I know that we sent out a email inviting questions to be asked. So And I'll also ask Brandon to come back on. We'll be the panel, and Soleil, go ahead. What are some of the questions we've had?
Hi, everybody. So one of the primary questions that we got asked prior to the webinar was, I thought a really good one was, what are some preemptive actions that compliance takes to avoid late locates?
Yes. Okay. Good. So when it comes to late locates, and I would say to clarify the question is that in the compliance and industry performance team, we would always remind members that they are responsible for performing their locates on time. But there is some advice that we commonly give to the sector. So first of all, we would say be cognizant of your seasonality. We know that there are times of year that are busier than others. You have data in order to help you predict what some of your volume may be from previous years for the current year, and consider building surge capacity. I had a meeting with a municipality a few months back, and they had some really thoughtful responses um, to improving their locate performance, where they had built-in surge capacity, where they had full-time employees who were seasonally deployed to provide locates, and at other times of year that were less busy for locating, they performed other functions within the municipality. So it was a really thoughtful look ahead to how they could manage their functions, understanding that they were going to be busier at certain times other than others. And the compliance industry performance team, we do that too. That's one of the reasons why we brought aboard additional help this year during this season to help us make sure that we're able to respond to complaints and do our jobs effectively too.
Thank you so much, Ryan. The next question is for Brandon. What statuses are considered compliant when entering a close date into 360 feedback? And to further explain the 5+3 rule, if possible.
Absolutely. So Ontario One Call's 360 feedback reporting system requires that its members report the status of the thing that they're obligated to do within an additional 3 business days from their obligation. So simply put, it's the 5+3. So an infrastructure owner has 5 business days to respond to the notification that they receive, and they have an additional 3 business days to notify Ontario One Call what they did with it. So the two, I guess, final statuses, as you would call them, are either cleared or marked incompleted. Both of those are considered valid statuses, provided they were done within the 5 business days. Ontario One Call uses that information to calculate the compliance adherence, to get to the compliance age as well as the compliance status.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So I had somebody ask why they see 3 status types, the compliant, non-compliant, and no response in the web portal instead of just the 2. The question being because they felt it was a little bit more confusing to have the 3. Can you touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually meant to clarify and allow our infrastructure owners or the members of the organization, as well as our compliance team, to focus on what we would consider more egregious or more concerning behavior in the system. Compliant obviously is the most desirable outcome to any request that's made or notification. Non-compliant indicates that either they didn't do what they were obligated to do within 5 business days, or the status that they've provided isn't one of the final compliance statuses. And non-compliant no response identifies that Ontario One Call sent the notification but has not received any 360 feedback. So we can't even begin to measure whether or not it was compliant. So obviously that's likely where we would spend the majority of our time focusing, is to determine why aren't you providing that additional information to us that you are required to, because it's invaluable to us as well as you as a member to measure your performance.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think that really clarifies that point. My next question is for Ryan. Does compliance focus on the member or excavator perspective? So do you focus on checking per late locate or per locate package?
So the regulator perspective, so the slide with the 25 members in 2022, that is members data. So not the package, but the individual members' performance, where the denominator is the total number of non-compliances, late or incomplete locates within a previous year. Still, for our excavator view, is the best data set for us to point to when it comes to the completion rate for the entire locate package. And I appreciate once again that we might have some fellow regulators on the call from other agencies, or perhaps others from the community as well. That I would just point out that there, depending on a number of factors, including geography, a locate package might require response from multiple underground infrastructure owners, which sort of breaks down the member's perspective and the excavator's perspective.
Perfect. The next question is about complaint processing. So for Ryan, are individuals able to submit anonymous complaints?
So it depends. So I'll say presently not. Remembering that the majority of our complaints are deal with late locates, there's just certain information that we need in order to process a complaint, including who's subject to the complaint and who's requested it, which means that it's not possible to file a late locate complaint anonymously. I would say that we're working on some enhancements right now. We're almost ready to take this for. It's almost ready for airtime. Our case management system is going to be implemented soon. It's in testing right now, and part of the way that our regulated community will experience that is that the complaints form will look different. And so right now we're testing the ability to file anonymous complaints for certain kinds of contraventions under the Act. So most notably would be digging without locates, as well as digging in an unsafe manner. So these are our most serious, most concerning public safety contraventions under our legislation. And the idea is that when our case management system is up and running, that those will be able to be submitted to us anonymously.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much. Brandon, I have one more two-part question for you. What is the easiest way to put close dates into 360 feedback? And when exporting data, are you able to search by master code or only by individual station code?
Sure. So I guess to follow up after Ryan's, it depends. A majority of our infrastructure owners utilize third-party software to manage their request volume. And as a part of that it automates the 360 feedback process. So if you have a software relationship established that talks to our system, likely it's already happening in the background for you. If you are managing your locate volume manually, there are some self-help videos as well as training available through our education and training department on how to manage your locates through our web portal. It's very simple. It takes seconds to go in, change the status, provide the close date, and close out the ticket in 360 feedback. The second part to the question is, do you want to ask that again? Because I almost forget the question.
Yeah, sure. When exporting data in order to be able to replicate compliance reporting, are they able to search by master codes or only by individual station codes?
Yeah, so you don't have to provide a station code in your search. You can use just the dates and get all of the data that your web portal account has access to. If you want to narrow down that result, you can use anything that is more restrictive. So you can use a master station code, which would limit access to whatever station codes are grouped under that master code, or you can select an individual or multiple station codes. So as an example, if you have a geographic area that only covers the eastern part of the province, you can choose that master code and it would provide results for, say, however many station codes are grouped there. But if you wanted to focus further to, say, only 2 of those station codes, you could search for specifically those 2 station codes as well, or just one.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Ryan, I had a question about compensation for money lost due to late locates. Are you able to talk about Ontario One Call's relationship in that situation?
Sure. So something that's unique in my regulatory experience, and something, so a feature of the legislation, the act that we administer, is that there are recourse sections for both excavators and members or underground infrastructure owners. So what this means is that under certain circumstances covered in these two sections under the Act, is that recourse and compensation can be requested for things like um, late locates, of course, when if infrastructure has been damaged, in circumstances where say a clearance is provided, or an underground infrastructure owner has indicated that their infrastructure will not be affected, and it is, and a few other circumstances that the recourse provisions of the legislation can kick in. Now, where an agreement for compensation can't be made under the Act, then parties are able to seek the assistance of the Ontario Land Tribunal in order to come to an agreement. Ontario Land Tribunal is also the tribunal that hears appeals of our orders. What I would say, though, from experience, is that as the administrative authority, that we're able to provide some guidance in terms of pointing parties to the correct sections of the legislation. But remember, we're not lawyers. We can't give you legal advice. We can give you advice on how to comply with our legislation, though. So I would say that if you're contemplating bringing a case to tribunal, I always recommend that you speak with your counsel, with your own counsel first, in order to understand what your obligations and rights are under the circumstances. And no two circumstances are the same. That's for sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Those are all the questions that I had submitted prior to the webinar. There are a couple that have come in the chat that I think would be good to answer.
Sure, let's do it.
I have one here. What is a master code versus a station code? Just for someone that's outside of the organization, if we could explain that really quickly.
Absolutely. So a master code is essentially a code that groups a number of other codes. So there's a parent-child relationship. So as an example, a utility that manages infrastructure across the province may route their volume to different locate service providers. So the station code typically is associated with a geographic region that is much smaller than the entire province. So it is very much a core functionality of managing your locate volume and having a good understanding of geographically how much is coming in. But our system also allows you to kind of group it up to a total.
Thank you so much. So the last question I have here, I think we've covered it a little bit, but I have had a few different people ask what the criteria is used to determine compliance age and status is.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way Ontario One Call measures compliance is that the Act stipulates that our members, the buried infrastructure owners, have 5 business days to respond to the excavator from the time that they receive the notification. So our system tracks when the notification is successfully sent to the infrastructure owner, and then we use the close date that's provided by the member to determine the duration that it took for them to do the thing that they said they did. And then we consider whether or not the final status is either cleared or marked incompleted. If it's any other status, it would be considered non-compliant.
Thank you so much. I just have one question left. We have a question that's come in. It says, Enbridge Gas was going to be charging for locates until they changed their minds. Are you aware if any other members will be charging for their locates in future?
I'm not aware of other members, but what I would say is that this is probably a really great segue for us to remind everyone on the call of the consultations that will be happening in the weeks to come. More news on this. So something that we communicated last week is that Ontario One Call is partnering with the ministry to engage in consultations on a few different topics. And one of the topics is whether or not underground infrastructure owners should be able to charge for locate provisions. Some additional topics there too, including the compliance tools that Ontario One Call is responsible for administering. So while I don't have more information on that, what I can say is that there will be invitations to these consultations, and that's a really great opportunity to be heard that's being provided. So do take advantage of that, and more information on that to come.
All right. Thank you so much. That's all the questions I have for today.
Excellent. Soleil, thank you for your support there. Brandon, thank you for being our very first guest on the industry performance webinars. We've been very excited to share this information with you. And again, you can expect to hear from us about quarterly. And each time we hold a performance webinar, we'll be reviewing quarterly performance when it comes to locate provisions, as well as important compliance topics, with the next one being the dispute resolution framework, which we don't get a lot of questions about, but I think that we should be getting a lot of questions about. So I'd like to share more information with the sector about that. So thank you very much for your time, everyone. Have a great day and a wonderful long weekend ahead. Take care.